What is up, beautiful people? Welcome back to another episode of The Coach's Quarters. I am your host, Jacob Meadows, and after what seems like a year-long hiatus, I am finally back. We were having a little bit of a technical issue with my mixer. Shout out to Sweetwater for having the best customer service on the planet and hooking me up with a replacement since mine was no longer viable. Shout out to Rode for making the Rodecaster Pro 2, which is arguably the coolest thing I have ever been able to own in my life, and the current mixer that I am running. It is dope. It does all sorts of stuff, and it makes this show sound leaps and bounds better than what my old equipment did. So that is where I have been. I have not had the technical capabilities to put out a show, and we are back. So I'm going to jump in on a lot of content. I've missed a lot of things. There has been so much going on in the sports world that I haven't been able to cover, and I'm very upset about it. From things down to the awards that are about to come up with the NFL. I had notes for every coach that was listed by ESPN as Coach of the Year candidates, and all of my stuff is pretty spot on. However, couldn't put that out there and into the airwaves, so none of it matters. I'm going to cover a little bit of it later, but it does seem to have come down to the wire, and I'm a little late to the show now, courtesy of my technical difficulties. So we are going to minimize that and maximize what is going on around us right now. So just to jump in quickly on the Texans, because we are a Texans show, and let's fucking go Houston. Houston won on a lucky drop by Tyler Goodson to beat the Colts, and I'm not going to put an asterisk next to that. Houston won, and then we managed to win the AFC South after Jacksonville absolutely imploded on themselves. They lost 5 of their last 6 games, and they seem to be a directionless ship, and I'm here for it. That is the greatest thing that could have happened to Houston. I love what we've done this year. I love the energy that D'Amico Ryans has brought to the team. I love our juggernaut quarterback, CJ Stroud. And I feel bad for Jacksonville fans. Jacksonville fired their entire defensive staff, and it just seems, again, just aimless. They are just shooting into the wind with nowhere to go. Calvin Ridley was brought in to shore up an offense that was supposed to be legendary. Travis Etienne was the only person on that offense that really showed out outside of Christian Kirk, who is absent for the final game of the season to determine whether or not they made the playoffs. It does feel like, as much as I talked mess about Christian Kirk's contract, he's the best player on that team. So that's a bright spot for Jacksonville, but it just feels like they have so many holes. I mean, Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker were the best 1-2 punch for edge rushers in the NFL. That's fantastic. But outside of that, and Travis Etienne, there's a lot of question marks on that team. Trevor Lawrence seems to have regressed. It did seem like he was playing a little injured there for the last rung of the season, so that could have been a problem. But then you have a whole separate issue to address, that maybe he's not necessarily as durable as you thought he was. Maybe he can't, handle the adversity quite as well as everybody thought he could coming out of Clemson. So there's a lot of question marks for Jacksonville, and that's nothing but a spectacular thing for the Houston Texans. It does seem like we will be at the top of the AFC South for years to come. Just as a little side note, today the Tennessee Titans fired Mike Vrabel. I do believe that was more of a mutual interest type deal. However, it was surprising to see him actually come out as fired. That team is a nightmare. It's a dumpster fire. The owner's worse than anybody else there. They've made some questionable decisions that Mike Vrabel didn't sign off on. So at the end of the day, Mike Vrabel is an awesome dude. He's a really, really good coach, and he did the best he could with the talent at his disposal. And all the thoughts and prayers to Mike Vrabel. Hopefully he lands his dream job as head coach of the New England Patriots should Bill Belichick step down. If he doesn't, I think Vrabes would be really good in Atlanta. But, we'll see how that shakes out after the season ends. But shout out to Mike Vrabel. Although he got fired, that dude's going to land on his feet and go somewhere where he's going to make a huge impact once again. To follow that, before we jump into anything NFL related, I am going to cover a little bit of what I saw coming out of the national championship last night between the Michigan Wolverines and the Washington Huskies. I know we more or less just covered the NFL football, but I actually pushed filming this show to today so that I could absorb that game and kind of get a feel for where the best two teams in college football were after the season was finished. So the very first thing that I have to point out, the very first observation about this game is that there was sloppy quarterback play on both sides. J.J. McCarthy's stock should have dropped a little bit. He did not look great as a quarterback. He had some fantastic plays as a runner, and just a few, right? But throwing the ball, he was nothing special. Washington's secondary looked really good versus J.J. McCarthy. And on the flip side of that, Michael Penix looked worse than he has all season at quarterback. And a lot of that is attributed to the fact that the right side of Washington's offensive line was the most abysmal collection of players in college football last night. It was hard to watch. It almost looked like the NFL or boosters had paid off the right guard and right tackle, mostly the right tackle, for the Washington Huskies and had them shave points, kind of like Adam Sandler did in The Longest Yard. And that was probably the biggest frustration with the game outside of the questionable officiating with the lack of calls on Michigan. But again, right tackle, number 73, Roger Rosengarten. If he had any draft stock whatsoever going into the game last night, I do not believe it should still exist. That dude was terrible. He was the worst player on the field at any point during the game. And it seemed like he actually couldn't block anybody. When you saw him go down the field, he would throw his shoulder at somebody and miss. And when he was backpedaling and actually supposed to be protecting the quarterback, people blew right by him. I cannot actually say that Michigan's defensive line was so good that they bamboozled this guy for an entire 4 quarters. There's just no shot. There's not a player on this planet that can do that. Khalil Mack could have lined up for Michigan and been stopped at least once. But this dude did not do that once. He could not stop water with a rag. It was really hard to watch. He was the worst player on the field. And it was sad because Michael Penix got absolutely obliterated, 100 times because of this guy. Whether he got knocked down, whether he got hit, whether he got rushed or sacked, Michael Penix was under duress because of number 73 more than any other reason throughout the entirety of the game. Number 77 actually played pretty well for a good portion of the game. He missed a couple of plays where, things just kind of got blown up or he did something wrong. He did miss a lot of blocks there in the second half. But again, nowhere near as bad as number 73. And number 77 is Julius Buelow. And I do think that this guy might have a little bit of talent there in his knickers, right? But his counterproduct did not. I hope that number 73 for the Huskies never makes it into the NFL. If he does, he'll never make it off of a practice squad. And if he does, it'll be a Miami Dolphin or a Houston Texans type situation where the entire offensive line is dead and they're just digging through the catacombs for somebody that can come up and play that next man up position until somebody with real talent actually comes into play. Michigan's run game was phenomenal. Blake Corum was a little outclassed early and often by Donovan Edwards, it was like 2 carries for 78 yards and 2 touchdowns in the first half. It was a masterclass of how to play the running back position. But Corum did end up kind of carrying the team over the finish line. Donovan Edwards ended up with 6 attempts for 104 yards and 2 touchdowns. Blake Corum ended up with 21 attempts, 134 yards and 2 touchdowns. So out of the two, Donovan Edwards definitely had the more impactful game. However, he was a huge boom player. And, sometimes that's a little hard to trust, especially when, you have, it was either 76 or 78 yards on 2 carries. And then you only get 30 more yards on the next 4. That average is still ridiculous. This is not a slight whatsoever. I think Donovan Edwards probably ends up being the better NFL back, courtesy of how freaking fast he is. Did not realize that dude could fly the way that he did. He was absolutely untouchable against Washington, and I think it is going to be super, super exciting to watch him in the NFL. I think that his draft stock is probably going to rise. Also, just to preface that, I do have stock rise, stock low, stock equal. I'm going to go over a couple players out of the game after I do this little, shindig over what actually happened on the game right after this. So I will have more to talk about with that. However, Donovan Edwards was a stud. He was the most impressive player on the field all night, and I do believe that he deserves credit for that because what he was able to do on the ground was phenomenal. You did see Washington struggle to produce a run game pretty bad. Dylan Johnson was pretty visibly hurt right out of the gate. And in my opinion, Dylan Johnson's one of the best running backs in the country. I hope he gets drafted high, and if not high, I hope he gets drafted to a good situation. I'd love him in Houston. I think he would be a fantastic Texan, and I think his drive and determination that he showed during the game when visibly injured and still going out on the field and still being the best running back to strap it up for the Washington Huskies, I don't think that can be overlooked because he is a phenomenal athlete. He, from all the perspectives that you see on the internet or any of the words out there in the abyss, he's an awesome guy. So shout out to Dylan Johnson. It was really cool to actually see him go out there. It made you cringe every time he caught the ball or ran the ball because it looked like he was getting hit by a truck because his ankle seems to have just absolutely exploded. Still kind of waiting to hear the final verdict on what's actually wrong so we know what happens with his draft stock. But, A+ guy, crazy that he was able to go back out there on the field despite all the injuries, crazy that he kept chugging along. And the dude put on a masterclass of how to actually represent your team, especially in the national championship. Outside of that, Washington had a better defensive line in the second half than Michigan. Michigan's defense is the best in the country. Everybody knows that. Washington's D-line absolutely ate in the second half. However, Michigan dominated the trenches for just about 4 quarters. You can give edge Washington for maybe 1, but Michigan put on a masterclass against Washington. Again, there was some rather suspicious or fishy officiating throughout the game. It really felt like Washington was getting picked on, and Michigan had virtually no calls called against them until the game was so out of hand that it didn't matter. But that's neither here nor there because Washington definitely beat themselves. There was a litany of drops amongst the wide receivers and the tight ends for Washington. Michael Penix overthrew a bunch of people, underthrew the rest. And it was one of these things where it felt like Michael Penix was hearing footsteps for the majority of that game. He didn't have great protection. I do think that his left tackle had a terrific game, but it was a very tricky predicament for Washington because Michigan is good. Michigan was better than anybody Washington's played all season, and you really got a feel for that once the game started rolling. So shout out to Michigan. Shout out to Jim Harbaugh. Awesome to see him win a natty. I loved him for the 49ers. I think he's a terrific coach. I did not have a dog in this fight, although I did cheer for Michael Penix to hoist that trophy at the end of the game. It was a good game. It was very close through the first half. If, again, Michael Penix hits on like 2 throws and his blocking is marginally better and Donovan Edwards doesn't break 2 long touchdown runs in the first half, this game looks totally different. Like this was a game of inches, absolutely a game of inches. And Michigan took every inch that was at their disposal, and Washington seemed to give theirs away when the opportunities presented itself. Super fun game to watch. Had a blast watching it. But Michigan did take it. They took it pretty handedly. And now we get to kind of see where these kids that played in the national championship fall in the NFL. Throughout the game, there was a couple of people that I observed that, may or may not had their stock rise or fall or kind of stay the same more or less. And I did write down a couple of them just so I had something to give you guys. So defensive line, Chris Jenkins, I believe his stock either went up or stayed the same. He's already projected to go in the first round. He was an absolute menace against Washington's offensive line, which, not saying much after everything I just said. They played pretty poorly for the majority of the game. However, that dude was a bulldozer. So I do think that his stock either got better or solidified itself there in the first round. I think J.J. McCarthy's stock probably should drop. There's no telling. I have no idea where he's projected. I hope it's not high just because as much as I want to like J.J. McCarthy, I don't think that he's a terrific NFL quarterback. There's, every opportunity in the world that he is a good college quarterback. With his age, I'm pretty sure he's 20 years old. With his age and his intangibles, I don't like J.J. McCarthy as an NFL quarterback, and he did not play well in the Natty. His passing yards it was like 140 something pass yards. Like he was a non-factor. His run game carried their offense throughout the game. So if anything, J.J. McCarthy's stock dropped. You have running back Donovan Edwards. Stock went up. Pretty positive he's projected to go in the second round. I could see him slipping into the latter part of the first round or going high in the second round. His just the scope of how quick he is, his explosiveness and his acceleration, his size, like everything cumulatively, he's going to be good. Like he's either going to be a menace or he's going to be Trent Richardson, who looks like a menace and plays really poorly. But I really like the way that he hits holes. I like everything. His field vision seems to be good. His footwork is good, and he's fast as shit. So I like Donovan Edwards. I think his stock may have gone up. This game very likely may have helped him out with the financial side of being drafted into the NFL. Running back Blake Corum. I believe that Blake Corum's stock may have fallen a little bit in this. Blake Corum is an older player than Donovan Edwards. So I think Donovan probably would have gone before him anyways, just because, again, the speed, the size, the strength, that sort of stuff, plus the age. However, Blake Corum, if you erase the 59-yard run that he had in the first half, Blake Corum does not have a great game on 21 carries against a Washington defense that it seemed like everybody else that was running the ball, J.J. McCarthy included, was just running through for most of the night. So with that being said, I think Blake Corum's stock may have dropped. You might be able to see him at the earliest go in the latter part of round 2, but I really think he's going to end up being a round 3, round 4 guy, which is great for a team looking for a budget pickup that's going to be fantastic. I think he's a good running back. I like Blake Corum. He was one of my favorite running backs in the country coming into this game. So I like Blake Corum. I like what he's capable of doing. I just think that this game did not necessarily help his draft stock much because he was played very well. You could tell that Washington watched a lot of film on how to stop him, and then they executed rather well, sans the 159-yard run. And then my last Michigan guy that I wanted to cover was Mikey Sainristil. Pretty sure I'm saying that last name wrong. I heard it said a couple of different times or a couple of different ways on TV last night, so I don't really have a good way of saying it. However, he looked great. He was all over the field. He's a little undersized at 5'10" and about $185, but he's got a high football IQ, it seemed. He was really doing well, making a play on the ball, sealed the game with an interception in the end. And it just looks like as a defensive back, no matter how you use him, whether he's your nickel corner or whether he ends up being an outside guy, because he did seem fast. It does seem like he's got a very strong feel for what's going on around him. His communication with his teammates look good. So I like him to translate, and I think that he might actually be, whether it's a day 1 starter or a week 6 starter, I think he can almost immediately contribute in the league. There's a lot of cornerback and DB needy teams out there, and I do think that he could be a plug and play for quite a few teams despite being marginally undersized. Bouncing over to the Washington players. Rome Odunze, again, probably saying that last name incorrectly. I think his draft stock stays about equal just because of Michael Penix's inability to get the ball into his receivers' hands on some plays, and then a litany of drops and just bad plays and this, that, and the other for the rest of it. His wide receivers, I'm not going to touch much just because it was a bad game for the Washington pass game. I do think that edge Braylon Trice's stock may fall a little bit after the national championship. He had 3 combined tackles, 2 solos, and that was it. He got pushed around quite a bit by the Michigan offensive line, albeit Michigan's offensive line is good. They've been good all year. But in the big moments, you want your big players to really show up. Braylon Trice is one of the better known, bigger players for Washington, and he was almost a non-factor for this game. He was able to put some pressure on McCarthy a few times, but J.J. McCarthy didn't have to throw it very much, and he wasn't a factor in the run game. So with that said, if this game were to affect his draft stock whatsoever, I do think that Braylon Trice takes a step back. Quarterback Michael Penix, I have this as an equal or a raise on the draft stock. That could come into question. A lot of people probably won't agree with that assessment, but I think the lack of blocking from his offensive line really rattled him. However, that dude was hurt for a large portion of the game and never came off of the field, and he directed traffic all game for his team. He missed a lot of throws, but he also had a lot of receivers drop balls throughout the game from quarter 1 to quarter 4. They had a significant amount of drops, and it was more drops than overthrows. So I like Michael Penix as a leader. I think in the right situation, I think Michael Penix could be a day 1 starter, and I think he could be an impact player for several teams in the NFL. I am excited to see Michael Penix in the league. And I think that this game should have risen his stock so long as he is healthy for the combine or, their pro day, or he can kind of give people something to look at. I think Michael Penix could be a top of the first round. I think he could go in the second round at the latest. And I think he deserves every bit of it because I think he is the best quarterback in this draft, pound for pound. Last one for Washington before we jump into the fun NFL information. I have Troy Fontenot, the left tackle for Washington, who played a spectacular game of all of the Washington offensive linemen. He's expected to play guard in the NFL. That's kind of what he projects as. He's a little bit smaller with the wingspan and whatnot, so they are projecting him to slide into guard. Throughout the last 2 years, he's only allowed 2 sacks, which is amazing. He looked great in the Natty. So I do think that his stock goes up against the best defensive line in the country. I think that would be just a fair and valid assessment for him. Good for him. He's the only guy that got just a clear-cut draft stock raise out of me for this. So that's awesome. So that wraps up our national championship coverage. I'm finally done talking college football. We'll probably cover a lot more college ball next year. Just didn't really get into it this year. So without any further ado, we are going to go ahead and jump back into the NFL. Like I said previously, I had the coach of the year all drawn out before it started getting reported on real heavily by the media, and they basically hit all the high points that I had written down. I was a little late to the show with this. So my finalists for coach of the year is going to be on the second tier, John Harbaugh and Shane Steichen. For very, very, very different reasons. John Harbaugh already had a good team. It was kind of Super Bowl or bust for the Ravens from the beginning of the year till now. And Shane Steichen, who took over the Colts, he was the Philadelphia offensive coordinator. And honestly, personal pick, I have Shane Steichen a lot higher than I actually have him on this sheet. However, for the purpose of a good show and where things probably are going to end up going, I have him in my tier 2 range. Shane Steichen took over the Colts. His starting quarterback that they drafted 4th overall is out for the season. He was hurt in week 4, and Anthony Richardson. Gardner Minshew stepped in. They had to deal with the Jonathan Taylor debacle with his contract and what have you. And Shane Steichen almost took the Colts to the playoffs. Honestly, they probably go to the playoffs if it weren't for a drop pass by their backup running back on the final offensive snap of the Week 18 game against the Houston Texans. And through adversity, I think Shane Steichen was a terrific coach. Philadelphia has absolutely crumbled without him. They've looked like a totally different team without him calling the offense. And I think Shane Steichen deserves probably a lot more praise than what he's going to get at the end of this year as an offensive-minded coach. In the tier 1 range for my coach of the year candidates, I have 3 guys. I have DeMeco Ryans because I'm a homer. He's a rookie head coach with a rookie quarterback that's going to the playoffs after winning their division. I have Kevin Stefanski, who's had 4 separate quarterbacks. They lost the best running back in the league in Nick Chubb early on to a season-ending injury. They've had nothing but adversity along the offensive line, at wide receiver, on the defense. They've gone through tons of injuries. They've gone through tons of players, next man up mantra. And throughout it all, Kevin Stefanski has led the Browns to the playoffs. The Browns look poised to just have a run, assuming that C.J. Stroud doesn't stop them dead in their tracks. And they've done a whole lot with less than what they came into the season with. I love Kevin Stefanski for Coach of the Year. And then the final guy, we have Motor City Dan Campbell, as said by the Pat McAfee Show. We have Dan Campbell, the head coach of the Detroit Lions, who similarly to Kevin Stefanski has taken a team from the belly of the NFL and taken them to this top echelon of teams. The Lions are very good. They've had nothing but turmoil on their team with injuries to multiple people. You have David Montgomery, who's missed multiple weeks, CJ Gardner-Johnson, who's missed multiple weeks, Brian Branch, who's missed multiple weeks. They've had to start a rookie running back in Jahmyr Gibbs, who, albeit was a first-round pick, was kind of brought along a little slow and maybe wasn't as prepared to be a starter in the NFL as he should have been whenever he started taking snaps there. You had various injuries to Amon-Ra St. Brown. You had a little bit of ups and downs with the rest of the receiving core. They had to bring in Donovan Peoples-Jones from the Cleveland Browns because Jameson Williams came back so slowly. So there was a lot that went into this for the Detroit Lions. They still ended the season the top of their division. They probably should have beaten the Cowboys and taken a better seed in the playoffs. It doesn't matter now. But props to Motor City Dan Campbell. He's done a terrific job with the Lions. All three of those guys are in my first tier range. I do think that Kevin Stefanski probably ends up winning it. If I were plugging this into my gambling show, I think Kevin Stefanski should probably be the favorite to win it, seeing as how Cleveland's so stacked, with honorable mention going to D'Amico Ryans. I know a lot of the public wants Dan Campbell to win it, but I think that the Dan Gamble nickname and losing the Cowboys game because they refused to kick the extra point to go into overtime, I actually think that seeded his first place slot in that over to Kevin Stefanski with a very close second place tie to D'Amico Ryans. D'Amico could easily win it, right? Again, rookie quarterback, rookie head coach, won the division after the last, 2 or 3 years for the Houston Texans have just been awful. You had the end of the Bill O'Brien era. You had Dave Caldwell. You had Lovie Smith. We didn't have a lot of success under either three. So at the latter end of Bill O'Brien, at least. So he's done things that nobody expected. We were supposed to be a 3-4 win team this year, blew those expectations out of the water. It's been a fantastic season. We've hit on all our draft picks, but I could see it going Kevin Stefanski just because of the quarterbacks that they've rolled out. And, Joe Flacco was shotgunning beers on his couch, avoiding his children, just 6 weeks ago, got called by the Browns, and now he's out there winning football games. His stats are ridiculous. He's thrown a lot of interceptions, but he's always been almost a Brett Favre style player. And the team loves him. The fans love him. And it's awesome to see Joe Flacco come off the couch and play quarterback as well as he has. So I could see it being Kevin Stefanski. If I were to put money on it, I would probably put money on Kevin Stefanski. I want D'Amico Ryans to win it at the end of the day. But yeah, that's Coach of the Year. That rounds out my picks for whom I think is going to take the helm. If you are looking at this from a gambling perspective, because I haven't done a gambling show in a while, I would put my money on Kevin Stefanski before anybody else. If you don't like the Kevin Stefanski pick, I would go D'Amico Ryans. Moving on to another set of awards that I've already had drawn out over the previous weeks when I was missing. We have Offensive Rookie of the Year and Defensive Rookie of the Year. I am easily able to put my bias aside for Offensive Rookie of the Year, and there's a two-way tie for me, and I'm a CJ Stroud homer. I thought he was the best, or maybe not the best, but the most NFL-ready quarterback coming out of the draft when we took him. But it's between CJ Stroud and Puka Nacua, and I don't even care who wins it. Both of them are equally as deserving of it for different reasons. I will cover the reasons for both of them. For gambling purposes, again, I'm probably not going to put out a gambling pod this week. So for gambling purposes, if you're listening to this show hoping that you can win some money out of this, I'd put all my money on CJ Stroud. I think Stroud is going to win it, mostly because quarterback in the eyes of Vegas is the most important thing since sliced bread, but also because he deserves it, right? Puka Nacua's had an amazing season. CJ Stroud has had a more amazing season, despite missing 2 games. So going over the broken records and the accolades that CJ Stroud has compiled this year before we jump to Puka, right? CJ Stroud tied the most touchdowns in a single game by a rookie quarterback with 5, Week 9 versus Tampa Bay. He tied Ray Buavid, the one player in all of this that I had never heard before, Matt Stafford, Jameis Winston, Deshaun Watson, and Daniel Jones. He has the most pass yards in a game by a rookie with 470, also Week 9 versus Tampa Bay. Most pass attempts without an interception to start his career. That record ended in Week 6 versus New Orleans. Most pass yards with 0 interceptions in first 2 career starts with 626 pass yards. First quarterback to have at least 900 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 0 picks in first 3 career starts. Youngest player ever with 450 plus yards and 5 touchdowns in a game, surpassed Patrick Mahomes. Highest single game passer rating by a rookie in NFL history with a 147.8 Week 9 versus Tampa Bay. And he won Offensive Rookie of the Month in September and Offensive Rookie of the Week in Week 9 for the game against Tampa Bay. Just miraculous. He's also led the Texans to a 10-7 record. Not all of the wins were his. Naturally, he was out with a concussion for a couple of weeks. But the vast difference in the Texans' offense and team as a whole when CJ Stroud is on the field versus off of it is very symptomatic of what he's been able to do for this team, how everybody has bought into him, and how he is the leader moving forward and arguably more deserving of Offensive Rookie of the Year because CJ Stroud is now the face of the franchise. What he has been able to do with the same weapons that Case Keenum had, that Case Keenum couldn't do, and there are better backup quarterbacks in the league. Case Keenum is a wily veteran. He has ran an offense in Houston before. And the fact that CJ Stroud is just so much more remarkably better with every aspect of his game, CJ Stroud deserves the Offensive Rookie of the Year. The other Offensive Rookie of the Year candidate, Puka Nacua, is a wide receiver for the Los Angeles Rams, and he has broken 2 major records this year. And to preface this, wide receivers have much fewer records to break than quarterbacks. They can do much little with what they do. It requires a quarterback to throw them the ball. Right, so Puka Nacua has the most receptions by a rookie wide receiver with 105, breaking Jalen Waddle's 2021 record of 104 receptions, and then receiving yards in a season by a rookie wide receiver with 1,486, breaking Bill Gromman of the Houston Oilers record that has stood since 1960. Now, what makes Puka Nacua so special, right? Because it just with that information, he broke a couple of records, so what? The Los Angeles Rams were the lowest rated NFC team in the NFL coming into this season. They're now a playoff team. Cooper Kupp plays for the Los Angeles Rams, widely viewed as one of the best wide receivers in the league. Puka Nacua outpaced him in every category. And myself, as well as millions of other NFL viewers, when Cooper Kupp was coming back off of his injury, I thought that, Puka Nacua was going to cede a lot of his receptions, yards, all of his targets to Cooper Kupp. That was not the case. Puka Nacua cemented himself as the number 1 wide receiver on the Los Angeles Rams football team, despite Cooper Kupp being there, despite Tyler Higbee being such a good tight end, all of it. So Puka stepped into a good situation, made it immediately better, and then took the crown from somebody who was already fantastic. So what makes Puka so deserving of the Offensive Rookie of the Year is because he came out and he basically told Cooper Kupp to his face that this is my team now. And then Cooper Kupp shook his hand and gladly stepped off of the throne. So I love Puka Nacua. I don't know anybody that was high on Puka Nacua going into this season. I didn't even know who he was. I don't know a single person in all of my vast NFL knowledge, all of my friends that are huge football fans. I know not one person that was high on Puka Nacua coming into this year. I know a shit ton of people that were high on CJ Stroud. So that is my biggest reasoning behind if Puka Nacua were to win Offensive Rookie of the Year over CJ Stroud, I would not bat an eye because the dude absolutely deserves it just as much. Moving on to the Defensive Rookie of the Year. I have 3 people on this list. I have the Vegas numbers 1 and 2 to win it, and then also my pick for Defensive Rookie of the Year. You have Jalen Carter of the Philadelphia Eagles with 33 combined tackles, 13 assists, and 6 sacks this season. You have Will Anderson for the Houston Texans with 45 combined tackles, 16 assists, and 7 sacks this season. And their numbers 1 and 2, respectively. I think Jalen Carter has had a fantastic year in Philadelphia. I think he did a lot to shore up the run defense. And I think he is an absolute presence in pass defense, right? I think he's good at rushing the passer. I think that he is going to blossom into a terrific football player. Same can be said about Will Anderson. I was on the Will Anderson hype train all year. Thought that was the best pick of the draft, taking him number 3 out of Alabama. And I thought he should have been 1 for Defensive Rookie of the Year for a significant part of this season. However, there is one player that I slot above Will Anderson. Jalen Carter is the betting favorite. I think Will Anderson should win it over Jalen Carter, but I think that this last person should win it over both. As much as I'd love Houston to win the offensive and defensive rookies of the year, as a Houston fan, that's so cool. Just absolutely phenomenal. However, Devon Witherspoon for the Seattle Seahawks should win this award. He had 79 combined tackles, 23 assists, 3 sacks, and 1 pick. And as a rookie, he was remarkably the best cornerback on the Seattle Seahawks squad. I think Pete Carroll did a great job coaching this kid, and I think he's had a phenomenal season. I think he was an impact player. Seattle missed the playoffs by 6 plays against Arizona. It was a really good game. They ended up getting eliminated. I think Devon, however you pronounce it, Devon Witherspoon, I think he should win Defensive Rookie of the Year over Will Anderson and Jalen Carter. If you're listening to this show for gambling takes, his odds are they'll pay you much better if he ends up winning it. I think he has the stats to prove that he should win Defensive Rookie of the Year. And I think that he had the overall impact on his team that should place him for Defensive Rookie of the Year. No matter what Jalen Carter, Will Anderson have done, Devon Witherspoon was able to defend the pass or, play secondary against some of the better people in the NFL. Seattle did not have an easy schedule this year. And the dude showed out early and often and kept it going throughout the rest of the year. So props to Devon Witherspoon. I really hope that he wins the Defensive Rookie of the Year. I have no money on this. I really have no pony in this race. I think Will Anderson would be a fantastic pick, and I'd love to see Houston take home both Rookie of the Year awards. I think Will Anderson deserves it. I just think that there was a more deserving player out there. All right, last but not least, your closer to the show, ladies and gentlemen. I have a playoff picture for you. I have a bracket all the way through to the Super Bowl. I have picks throughout, and this has been an incredible playoff race. Miami lost to Buffalo. They ended up losing the division after being the best team in football for the first 12 weeks of the year, despite not being able to beat a winning team. You had the Philadelphia Eagles fall to the New York Giants in the final week to lose their seed in the playoffs. Just so many terrific things. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers ended up coming out on top of the NFC South. They actually look good. Baker Mayfield made a shit ton of money and incentives that he deserved every bit of. I hope they retain him. You had the Houston Texans, like earlier reported in the show, that, because of a Jacksonville loss and a drop pass by the Colts, also a very good game by all of the players on the Texans and Colts, but all of the players on the Texans to secure that victory. Don't let me lead you astray and believe that it was one drop pass that decided that game. Houston played their asses off. You had a lot of things that really came out of left field that really set the pace for this playoff picture. So without any further ado, you have your wild card games coming up this weekend. You have the Pittsburgh Steelers versus the Buffalo Bills. You have the Miami Dolphins versus the Kansas City Chiefs. You have the Cleveland Browns at the Houston Texans. You have Green Bay versus Dallas. You have the Los Angeles Rams versus Detroit in the battle of Matt Stafford and Matt Stafford's ex-team. You have Philadelphia versus Tampa Bay. Those are your 6 wild card games, with the Baltimore Ravens and San Francisco 49ers both having a bye. So to walk you through this, I think Buffalo beats the Pittsburgh Steelers. With TJ Watt out, I don't think Pittsburgh actually has a chance. I don't think Mason Rudolph is a great quarterback despite playing incredibly well for the last couple of weeks of the season. So I am taking Buffalo at home versus Pittsburgh. You have Miami versus Kansas City. Kansas City is the home team after winning their division. I think with the litany of injuries that Miami has sustained, especially with the litany of injuries Miami sustained the last week, I think Kansas City takes this game at Arrowhead. I would love to see Miami progress. There are so many holes that have been left on their team courtesy of players getting injured that I just do not see it happening against a seasoned Kansas City team and a healthy Patrick Mahomes at home at Arrowhead with a healthy, rested Travis Kelce and a good defense. You have Cleveland Browns at the Houston Texans. I have an asterisk next to this game. 1, because I'm a homer. 2, because we have a handful of injuries where if the players end up healthy and playing, if Will Anderson plays, if Jonathan Grenard plays, if Noah Brown plays, if Michael Dieter plays, if Andrew Beck plays, if we are healthy, I think CJ Stroud can beat the Cleveland Browns. So for the sake of this show, I'm going to take Houston as my winner over Cleveland at NRG. I'm going to take Houston for the playoff picture for you guys. You have Green Bay versus Dallas. I'm taking Dallas at home against an inexperienced Jordan Love and a less than stellar Green Bay team. They have too many injuries. Dallas is too good against bad squads. I think Dallas takes that game by about 10 points. You have Los Angeles Rams versus the Detroit Lions. I love this game, and this absolutely breaks my heart. I hate that the NFL is scripted and they have the Rams versus the Lions on Wildcard weekend, and the first time the Lions have been to the playoffs in eons. Because I like the Rams. I like Matt Stafford to beat his old team in the super wild card weekend. And again, it crushes me. I hope the Lions win and that I am wrong. If you're listening to this show for gambling takes, don't gamble on this game. I wouldn't touch this game with a 10-foot pole. It feels like it'd go either way, but I like the Rams to beat the Lions. And then you have the Philadelphia Eagles versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Nobody other than the Jacksonville Jaguars have imploded worse than the Philadelphia Eagles. And I think the Eagles have imploded worse. I'm taking Tampa Bay at home versus the Philadelphia Eagles just because I think that Philly's cooked. I think they need to fire their offensive coordinator. I think they need to fire Matt Patricia. Nobody ever needs to hire him again. And I think Philadelphia needs to hit the reset button on their coaching staff. Maybe not Nick Sirianni, but the rest of them. So that leaves you the Baltimore Ravens, the Houston Texans, the Buffalo Bills, the Kansas City Chiefs, the San Francisco 49ers, the Los Angeles Rams, the Dallas Cowboys, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I have Baltimore beating Houston in Baltimore. I have Buffalo beating Kansas City. I have San Francisco beating the Rams, and I have Dallas beating Tampa Bay. Moving into the conference championships, you have the Baltimore Ravens versus the Buffalo Bills. I am taking Baltimore. You have the San Francisco 49ers versus the Dallas Cowboys, and I'm taking San Francisco. And in the Super Bowl, you have the Baltimore Ravens and the San Francisco 49ers, just the way the football gods intended at the beginning of the season, and I am taking the Baltimore Ravens. And that wraps up this show. Thank you all for your patience. Thank you all for tuning in after my gigantic hiatus for like the third hiatus this season. It has been a very, very trying year. It has been a lot of learning curves, and it has been a phenomenal first football season with the coaches' quarters. I cannot wait until next season. I cannot wait to keep going as the playoffs continue, to keep bringing you coverage of what's going on throughout the weeks. And we will be back in a couple of days with another show. I love you all. We are out.